Chapter 1. The searing bite of silver against my throat was my only tether to reality. I did not wake to the delicate scent of white roses. I did not wake to the gentle, excited hum of my handmaidens preparing me for my wedding day. Instead, I was dragged back to consciousness by the suffocating stench of wet cobblestone, soured ale, and unwashed bodies. My wrists burned. Thick, unforgiving chains bound my hands tightly behind my back, the metal scorching my flesh with every agonizing breath. My vision swam. I blinked against the harsh, unforgiving glare of the morning sun. I was kneeling. The rough stones scraped against my bare knees. I was right in the center of the royal plaza. A deafening roar of laughter washed over me, a tidal wave of sheer mockery from the gathered crowd. I wrenched my head up. The silver collar bit savagely into my windpipe, choking off my gasp. High above me, standing on the gleaming marble dais where we were supposed to take our sacred vows, was Tyrant. He looked immaculate in his ceremonial golden armor. The sunlight caught the polished metal, making him look like a descending god. But he was not looking at me. His arm was coiled firmly around a slender waist. Phaedra, my younger sister. She leaned into his chest, her crimson lips curved into a venomous, triumphant smile. She wore my crown. The phantom memory of a blade piercing my chest flared violently behind my ribs. A breathless, paralyzing ache. Trauma clawed at my fractured mind, threatening to drag me back into the dark, windowless cell where I had been broken over the past month. I couldn't breathe. The panic was a living thing, expanding in my lungs. People of Olympus, Tyrant's voice boomed. It echoed off the ancient stone walls, dripping with practiced authority. Behold the fraud, the false royal, the corrupted bloodline. He pointed a disgusted, leather-clad finger down at me. Today, I strip Calliope of her titles, her stolen wealth, and her false dignity. She is no longer a princess. She is an auction block offering, a tribute to the lowest, most feral rogue who wishes to claim her before my true wedding begins. The crowd erupted. Spittle struck my cheek. A rotting apple slammed into my shoulder, leaving a stinging bruise. They were wild animals, starved for a gruesome spectacle. From the filthy masses, an imposing, grotesque figure lumbered forward, a rogue wolf. His scent was absolutely revolting, a nauseating mixture of decaying meat and dried sweat. He licked his yellowed, cracked teeth, his hungry eyes raking over the torn silk of my ruined nightgown. "I'll gladly take the spoiled meat," the rogue grunted. He reached a filthy, clawed hand toward my face. The terror hit a breaking point. My heart hammered a frantic, suicidal rhythm against my ribcage. I remembered the dark room. I remembered the agony. I would not be a victim again. I refused to die as a broken toy for their amusement. The paralyzing fear suddenly curdled, igniting into a blazing, blinding wrath. As the rogue's calloused fingers brushed the dirt on my chin, I snapped my jaw shut. I bit down on my own lip with every ounce of strength I had left. The delicate flesh tore. Hot, metallic copper flooded my tongue. I spat a thick glob of crimson blood directly onto the pristine white stones at the rogue's boots. "I invoke the ancient law," I rasped. My throat was raw, bleeding from the silver, but my voice cut through the clamor like a freshly sharpened blade. "I claim the conqueror." The sprawling plaza plunged into a dead, leaden silence. The ancient law. A brutal, archaic blood rite older than the kingdom itself. A condemned Omega could bypass her execution if she offered herself to the strongest alpha present, provided he accepted the challenge. I raised a trembling, dirt-streaked hand. I did not point at the terrified nobles on the bleachers. I pointed straight into the thickest, blackest shadows of the elevated viewing gallery. There, sitting in absolute terrifying stillness, was a monster. Alpha Vane, the northern tyrant, the warlord who had slaughtered entire armies and bathed in their remains. For a long, agonizing second, nothing happened. The wind seemed to die. Then, a low, rumbling growl vibrated through the very foundation of the plaza. It was a sound that triggered every primal instinct screaming to run. Vane stood. He stepped out of the shadows. He was a towering tempest of dark leather, scarred skin, and lethal grace. His sheer aura crashed down on the square, a crushing, suffocating weight that forced weaker wolves to their knees in immediate submission. The scent of frost, crushed pine, and fresh blood instantly swallowed the putrid air of the plaza. He didn't walk, he prowled. Each step was calculated, predatory, and utterly silent. He reached the rogue. The filthy man opened his mouth, perhaps to beg, perhaps to challenge, but he never got the chance. Vane's boot lashed out. A sickening crack shattered the quiet. The rogue's knee caved backward, snapping like a dry twig. Bone fractured through his skin and dirty trousers. The man collapsed, shrieking in absolute, unadulterated agony, writhing in his own rapidly pooling blood. Vane did not even look at the screaming mess at his boots. He crouched smoothly before me. His eyes were molten amber, swirling with a feral, terrifying darkness that stole the breath from my lungs. He reached out. His large leather-clad fingers brushed a stray, blood-matted curl from my cheek. His touch was shockingly, devastatingly gentle against my bruised skin. He leaned in close. His breath ghosted over my ear, sending a violent electric shiver down my spine. "The price for your salvation," Vane murmured, his voice a dark, gravelly rumble meant only for me, "is your very soul, little lamb." Chapter 2. The world tilted on its axis. Before my exhausted mind could process his lethal promise, Vane's arms were under me. He hoisted me against his broad chest, as effortlessly as if I were made of silk and air. The silver chains clinked, pulling painfully taut against the stone pillar. Vane did not search for a key. He wrapped a colossal, scarred hand around the links and pulled. The enchanted silver fractured like brittle ice. Theron's enraged shout echoed from the dais. "Vane, you cross a dangerous line. She is my prisoner." Vane did not pause. He did not turn around. He simply raised his head. A deafening, earth-shattering roar tore from his chest. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated dominance. The shockwave hit my chest, making my own dormant wolf whimper in absolute submission. The entire royal guard took an involuntary, terrified step back. No one dared to stop him. He carried me into an imposing black carriage waiting at the edge of the square. The interior smelled intensely of him. Crushed pine, ozone, and that intoxicating hint of lethal danger. He set me down on the velvet seat with surprising, terrifying care. The carriage lurched forward. We were moving. We were leaving Olympus. The heavy wooden door opened a crack as the wheels began to roll. Otho, Vane's battle-scarred tactician, stepped onto the running board and slipped inside. He held a thick woolen winter cloak. "She is freezing, Alpha," Otho said. His voice was practical and gruff. He took a single step toward me, holding out the fabric. "Don't touch me." I flinched violently. My shoulders curled inward, trying to make myself as small as possible. The sudden movement, the approaching male figure. It was a brutal trigger. My breath hitched in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for a blow. The temperature in the carriage plummeted to freezing. Vane moved faster than my human eyes could track. His hand shot out, seizing Otho by the throat. With a brutal, crushing shove, he hurled the seasoned tactician against the wooden paneling. The carriage groaned under the violent impact. "Do not touch her!" Vane roared. His eyes were glowing a brilliant, terrifying crimson. The feral alpha beneath his skin was clawing at the surface, dangerously close to snapping. His chest heaved. He was losing control. I shrank back against the leather seat. I was trembling uncontrollably. Vane froze. He saw my absolute terror. The crimson in his eyes flickered, warring violently with his natural amber. He dropped Otho. The tactician gasped for air, quickly scrambling out of the carriage and pulling the door shut behind him. The sudden slam of the heavy door made me jump out of my skin. We were alone. The romantic tension in the confined space was suffocating. Every deep breath he took seemed to steal the oxygen straight from my lungs. I should not crave this broken thing, Vane's fierce expression seemed to say. His jaw was tight enough to crack stone. But her scent, gods, her scent. My fear smelled of rain-soaked jasmine. It was driving him insane. He slowly sank onto the seat opposite me. He reached into his dark coat and produced a small glass vial of healing salve. "Your wrists," he demanded softly. I hesitated. The silver had burned deep into my flesh, leaving raw, blistering sores. I extended my trembling hands. I braced myself. I waited for the agonizing sting. I waited for the heavy hand to strike me for being too slow. Instead, I felt a cool, soothing spread of ointment. His touch was meticulous. His large, lethal fingers moved with excruciating gentleness over my ruined skin. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The scent of his blood mixed with the forest moss of his aura. It was intoxicating. It made my pulse race for an entirely different reason. I flinched slightly as the salve hit a particularly deep cut. Instantly, Vane's fist slammed into the solid oak panel beside my head. Wood splintered into a dozen jagged pieces. I gasped. I shrank into a tiny ball, shutting my eyes tight. He leaned forward, crowding my space. His hands moved to cup my face. His grip was firm, inescapable, but it did not hurt. He tilted my head up, forcing me to face him. "Open your eyes," he commanded. I fluttered them open. His face was inches from mine. "I am not the man who broke you," Vane growled. His voice was thick with a dark, twisted tenderness. "And I will slaughter any living soul who ever makes you tremble like this again." Chapter 3. The Northern Keep was a fortress carved from obsidian and relentless ice. It was a brutal structure built for eternal warfare, completely devoid of the delicate gilded trims of my former home. Yet within these towering walls I drew my first full breath in months. The ever-present scent of wet dungeon stone faded. It was replaced by the crisp, biting aroma of snow-laden pine. I was given a sprawling chamber overlooking the frozen tundra. The hearth crackled with a comforting, steady warmth. I slept wrapped in thick, luxurious furs. But the truest source of my newfound peace was the looming shadow just beyond my iron-bound door. Vane never entered without permission. He simply stood guard in the freezing corridor. His formidable presence was a silent, unbreakable vow of protection. Days blurred into a quiet, strange rhythm. One dreary afternoon I sat by the roaring fire. My eyes drifted to a withered, decaying winter rose sitting in a cracked clay pot on the windowsill. Its petals were a sickly brown. The stem was dry, brittle, and defeated. A profound wave of sorrow washed over me. I understood what it felt like to be discarded and left to rot. Without thinking, I reached out. My trembling fingertips brushed the dead leaves. A sudden pulsating jolt of energy surged from my core. It rushed down my arm like liquid fire. The dying rose quaked. Color violently bled back into the lifeless petals, shifting from a decaying brown to a vibrant, bloody crimson. The crooked stem straightened with an audible snap. Fresh emerald leaves unfurled. Within seconds, the plant was perfectly, radiantly alive. I gasped. I snatched my hand back as if burned. A maid walking past the open doorway dropped her stack of folded linens. She stared at the impossible flower, then slowly raised her wide, reverent eyes to me. The rumor spread through the stronghold like wildfire. The princess is a healer. In a world ravaged by endless bloodshed and dark magic, a true healer was a myth, a divine vessel of pure life energy. It was the ultimate prize for any warlord. Suddenly, the agonizing torture of the past month made terrifying sense. This was why Tyrant had kept me caged. He did not want a queen, he wanted a limitless, living battery. That evening the thick oak door groaned open. Vane entered. He did not wear his intimidating battle armor. He wore a simple, unlaced linen shirt. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, revealing corded forearms etched with intricate tribal runes. He carried a wooden tray holding a steaming bowl of venison stew. He set the tray on the sturdy table and pulled up a chair. "Eat." I picked up the silver spoon. My hand still harbored a phantom weakness. He watched me with unwavering intensity. His molten golden eyes tracked the delicate movement of my throat as I swallowed the warm, savory broth. The sheer possessiveness in his gaze was a physical weight pressing against my skin. "A raven arrived from the south," Vane stated abruptly. His voice was dangerously calm. My spoon halted midair. Tyrant sent a bloodletter. Vane leaned back, crossing his arms over his broad chest. The rigid muscles in his jaw ticked. He demands the immediate return of his stolen artifact. He swore that if I do not surrender you by the next full moon, he will drown the entire north in an ocean of blood. A sudden glacial dread pooled in my stomach. The warmth of the stew vanished. "And what did you reply?" Vane's lips curled into a feral, terrifying smile. It was the smile of an apex predator admiring its prey. I sent him the raven's head in a wooden box, along with a sworn promise to mount his own skull upon my iron gates. The absolute, unflinching certainty in his voice cracked a long-standing wall around my battered heart. I looked at him. I truly looked at this terrifying alpha. He was building fires for me. He was standing in the freezing cold so I could sleep. He was eagerly declaring war against the entire world just to keep me safe. Trust, fragile and terrifying, began to take root in my soul. But peace in the frozen north was nothing more than a fleeting illusion. It happened in the dead, silent pitch of night. The wooden doors of my bedchamber shattered completely inward. Wood fragments sprayed across the stone floor. Shadows poured into the room like spilling ink. Tyrant's elite assassins. They were draped in dark cloaks, their curved blades dripping with a foul, glowing green venom. I screamed, scrambling backward against the headboard. Before the leading assassin could even reach the edge of my bed, a blur of pure, lethal fury intercepted him. Vane! He tore through them like an awakened god of war. He did not bother drawing a sword. He used his bare hands, his claws extended, ripping through flesh and snapping necks with brutal, terrifying efficiency. The freezing air instantly filled with the suffocating stench of spilled blood and necrotic magic. "Calliope, stay back!" Vane roared. He hurled a broken body straight through the glass window. The panes shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces, but there were simply too many of them. In the chaotic melee, a distinct shadow detached itself from the ceiling directly above him. I saw the glint of a jagged spear. It pulsed with a sickly, rotting aura, pure black magic. "Vane, above you," I shrieked, my voice tearing. He turned. but he was a fraction of a second too late. The cursed spear plunged downward. It struck Vane squarely in the chest, driving deep through muscle and bone, burying itself directly into his heart. The northern tyrant gasped. His golden eyes blew wide with shock. The assassin maliciously twisted the shaft before Vane backhanded him, crushing the man's skull against the solid stone wall. But the catastrophic damage was already done. Vane stumbled backward. He dropped to his knees. The veins radiating from the fatal wound instantly turned a putrid, unnatural black. The foul necrosis spread with terrifying, unstoppable speed across his chest. He looked up at me. A silent, devastating apology swirled in his fading amber eyes. Then the most feared alpha in the realm collapsed onto the blood-soaked floor. Chapter 4. No, 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 no! I scrambled off the mattress. My bare knees slammed hard against the unforgiving stone floor. I crawled frantically through the shattered glass and pooling blood until I reached him. Vane was convulsing. His skin radiated an unnatural, feverish heat that burned right through his linen shirt. The cursed black rot was spiderwebbing up his muscular neck, a corrosive web of lethal dark magic. Rapid footsteps thundered down the corridor. Otho burst into the ruined chamber, his broadsword drawn. A dozen elite guards spilled in behind him. The scarred tactician took one look at his fallen alpha and dropped his weapon. The steel clattered against the stone like a deafening death knell. "Necrotic magic," Otho whispered, his weathered face drained of all color. "It is eating his heart. He is dying. I can heal him, Henry," I cried. Panic violently choked my words. "I am a healer. I fixed the rose." I did not wait for permission. I tore open Vane's ruined, bloody shirt. His imposing chest was rigid. His breathing was shallow and fractured. I placed both of my bare hands directly over his heart, pressing right over the epicenter of the spreading black rot. "Heal. Please, heal." I begged the dormant power residing inside my core. I felt the familiar violent surge in my chest. I pushed the energy forcefully down my arms. I desperately expected the warm, golden light that had restored the winter flower. I waited for the miraculous salvation that would save the only man who had ever made me feel safe. But there was no light. Instead, a thick, suffocating cloud of pitch-black smoke erupted violently from my palms. The exact moment the dark mist touched Vane's skin, he let out an agonizing, blood-curdling scream. The flesh beneath my desperate hands did not knit together. It began to dissolve. The black rot rapidly accelerated, devouring his muscle tissue at an impossible, terrifying rate. "Stop!" Otho roared. He lunged forward. He grabbed my shoulders and hauled me backward with crushing force. "You are killing him." "I'm not," I sobbed. I stared at my trembling hands in pure, unadulterated terror. Plumes of dark, oily mist still clung tightly to my fingers. The scent of ozone had been replaced by the unmistakable stench of decay. "I'm trying to save him." Otho looked from my smoking hands to the dying alpha. Then his wide, horrified eyes darted toward the windowsill. The clay pot. The winter rose was still vibrant, but the towering, centuries-old oak tree just outside the shattered window, the one whose sturdy branches used to brush the glass, was completely, utterly dead. Its lush emerald leaves had turned to gray ash. Its towering trunk was withered, petrified, and completely stripped of all life. The horrific realization hit the room like a physical blow. "You didn't heal the flower," Otho breathed. He took a slow, terrified step away from me, as if I were a venomous serpent. "You drained the life from the ancient oak to feed the rose. You are not a vessel of life." My blood turned to ice. I was not a healer. I was a deathbringer, a weaver of the void. My power was not to create life. It was to manipulate death, to command decay, to siphon souls from one vessel and forcefully shove them into another. The fractured pieces of my trauma slammed together with sickening, undeniable clarity. Tyrant hadn't wanted me to heal his dying kingdom. He had never believed the false prophecies. He knew exactly what I was from the very beginning. He wanted the blackest, most corrosive power in the realm. He wanted to use my death core to resurrect a rotting, unstoppable army of immortals. I was never meant to be his bride. I was his ultimate weapon. A deafening silence violently crashed over the room. It was broken only by Vane's fading, wet gasps. I looked down at the Alpha. His chest stopped heaving. The fierce golden light in his eyes dulled, quickly turning glassy and vacant. His magnificent head rolled to the side. His heart stopped. The silence was absolute. Otho collapsed to his knees. He buried his scarred face in his hands. A unified, soul-shattering howl of profound grief erupted from the guards behind him, echoing through the frozen halls of the northern keep. They had lost their king. I sat frozen on the floor. I looked at my hands, the hands of a grim reaper. The frantic panic in my chest suddenly vanished. It was entirely replaced by a chilling, terrifying stillness. The ancient darkness inside me recognized the death lingering in the room, and it purred in dark satisfaction. My eyes drifted back to Vane's lifeless body. The fear was entirely gone. The coldness in my veins was absolute. I would not let him go. Chapter 5. The laws of the universe were brutally simple. Life demanded life. To cheat death, an absolute equivalent exchange was required. I crawled toward Vane's lifeless body. The guards shouted behind me, their voices muffled as if submerged in deep water. Otho's rough hands grabbed my shoulders, trying to forcefully pull me away from the fallen Alpha. "Princess, let him go. The venom has taken him." I shoved the tactician backward with a sudden unnatural strength that sent him crashing to the stone floor. My eyes were fixed entirely on Vane's pale, ashen face. The black necrosis spiderwebbed across his chest, a toxic, creeping map of dark magic. I straddled his hips. I leaned over his still form, letting the heavy curtain of my hair fall around us, shutting out the chaotic world. My hands did not tremble. The paralyzing fear that had governed my entire existence was completely gone. I finally understood my terrifying purpose. I was not a fragile healer meant to mend broken bones. I was a vessel of the void. I could not create life, but I could command death to move. I could take it into myself. I pressed my lips against his cold, unresponsive mouth. I opened my soul and pulled. The connection was instantaneous. A blinding, agonizing surge of absolute agony tore through my veins. It felt like swallowing shattered glass coated in liquid fire. The pitch-black, necrotic smoke that had been devouring his heart rushed upward, funneling directly from his chest into my lungs. My skin began to crack. Searing pain erupted along my arms as the lethal venom transferred from his bloodstream into mine. Patches of my skin shifted into a bruised, decaying purple. I was dying. I was willingly pulling his execution into my own body. Beneath me, a colossal chest violently heaved. Vane gasped. His eyes snapped open. The dull, glassy vacancy was instantly gone, replaced by a blazing, brilliant amber. His feral gaze locked onto mine, widening in sheer, unadulterated horror as he realized exactly what I was doing. He saw the black rot creeping up my throat. He felt the life draining from my core to restart his beating heart. "No!" Vane roared. His voice was hoarse, tearing from his throat in a raw, desperate growl. He shoved his large hands against my shoulders, trying to physically break the connection. The imposing strength of the northern tyrant had returned, but he was terrified of hurting me further. "Stop!" he commanded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I do not permit you to die for me, Calliope. Stop." He tried to push me away, but I wrapped my arms tightly around his thick neck. I anchored myself to him, burying my face into the crook of his shoulder. The intoxicating scent of crushed pine and ozone washed over me, grounding my fading senses. This time, I whispered against his burning skin, my voice a fractured, dying breath. "Choose you." The mating bond snapped into place. It was not a union of golden light and celestial blessings. It was a terrifying, abyssal tether forged in darkness and spilled blood. A black, intricate mark burned itself into the skin of my collarbone, perfectly matching the dark rune searing into his chest. The last drop of venom left his body. The agonizing pain completely consumed my mind. My vision went black. I collapsed against his chest. Vane caught me. He pulled my limp body into his arms, letting out a soul-shattering roar of absolute devastation. But the power I had unleashed did not silently dissipate. The residual energy of the void mixed with his feral alpha aura, exploding outward in a devastating shockwave of pure, destructive force. The stone walls of the chamber violently trembled. The glass scattered on the floor pulverized into fine dust. Then the deafening boom of thunder shattered the sky. A war horn blared from the outer watchtower. It was a frantic, terrifying sound. The ground beneath the fortress quaked, trembling under the coordinated heavy footsteps of an unnatural army. Outside the broken window, the frozen horizon was swallowed by a creeping, suffocating darkness. 10,000 undead soldiers battered against the iron gates of the northern keep. And cutting through the howling wind, echoing with a sickening, possessive madness, was Tyrant's voice screaming my name. Chapter 6. The colossal iron gates of the keep groaned in violent protest. Metal fractured. The ancient, reinforced wood splintered under the crushing, relentless weight of the dead. A terrifying choir of soulless moans drifted over the towering battlements. Tyrant had brought hell directly to our frozen doorstep. I gasped for air. My heavy eyelids fluttered open. The toxic venom still burned through my veins like liquid fire, but the mating bond anchored my fraying soul. Vane was holding me securely against his broad, heaving chest. His golden eyes were blazing with a feral, fiercely protective fury. He carried me out onto the elevated stone balcony overlooking the snowy inner courtyard. Below us, the iron gates finally gave way. A sprawling sea of rotting, reanimated corpses flooded into the fortress. They moved with unnatural, jerky twitches. The freezing wind carried the revolting, suffocating stench of decayed flesh and necrotic magic. And standing amidst the terrifying sea of monsters, untouched and sickeningly arrogant, was Tyrant. His ceremonial golden armor was now tainted with a sickly, pulsating green glow. He tilted his aristocratic head back, his manic eyes locking onto me. The sheer madness in his gaze was absolute. "Give her back to me, Vane," Tyrant screamed. His voice was a twisted, obsessive shriek that scraped against my eardrums. "She belongs to the abyss. She belongs to me." Vane gently set me down against the freezing stone wall. He stood protectively in front of me, an immovable, lethal shield of corded muscle and murderous intent. "She belongs to no one but herself," Vane growled. His voice vibrated with a lethal, terrifying promise. Tyrant threw his head back and laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. "You think you can love her?" Tyrant mocked, stepping over a crawling corpse. "Look at her. She is a monster. She is a harbinger of endless decay. She brings only death and ruin. You will eventually grow to despise her rot. You will fear her lethal touch. Theron pointed a glowing armored finger directly at my bruised, necrotic skin. He will lock you away, Calliope, just as I did. Only I can harness your magnificent void. Only I accept your true monstrous nature. Come to me. I am your only sanctuary. His toxic words washed over me. For a lifetime, those deeply manipulative lies had paralyzed me. He had thoroughly convinced me I was a broken, dangerous thing needing a cage. But as I looked at the towering alpha shielding me from the world, the suffocating illusion completely shattered. Theron did not love me. He loved the apocalyptic, destructive power I possessed. He wanted to weaponize my soul to conquer the realms. Vane did not want my power. He had explicitly, desperately forbidden me from dying to save his life. He was willing to perish in the snow just to keep me safe. The difference was staggering. My fear evaporated entirely into the freezing night air. Her darkness is my salvation, Vane roared. He leaped from the stone balcony, landing in the courtyard with an earth-shattering impact. He shifted mid-air. Bone cracked, muscle expanded. Within seconds, a colossal, midnight black wolf stood roaring in the snow. He lunged directly into the mindless horde of the undead. It was an absolute slaughter. Vane tore through the rotting soldiers with savage, unchecked brutality. He ripped off limbs. He snapped brittle spines in his powerful jaws. He was a terrifying tempest of fangs and fury, fiercely defending the very darkness the world feared. He carved a violent, bloody path straight toward the golden-armored king. Theron did not draw his enchanted sword. He simply stood there, a twisted, victorious smile stretching across his pale face. As the giant black wolf lunged forward for the final lethal strike, Theron raised his hands. He did not attack the charging alpha. Instead, Theron drew a jagged obsidian dagger from his belt and plunged it directly into his own chest. "No!" Otho screamed from the stone battlements. Black magic erupted violently from Theron's self-inflicted wound. A crackling crimson tether shot across the snowy courtyard, striking Vane squarely in the chest. The great black wolf violently crashed into the snow, his momentum completely halted. Vane shifted back to his human form. He collapsed onto his hands and knees, violently coughing up a thick puddle of black blood. The dark rune on his chest, the exact spot where he had absorbed Theron's necrotic poison earlier, glowed with a sickening, pulsating red light. Theron fell to his knees. He clutched the dark dagger protruding from his chest. He was bleeding profusely, but he was laughing hysterically. "Did you honestly think I would come unprepared?" Theron wheezed. His lips were stained with dark blood. I anchored my soul to the residual venom lingering in his veins, the blood tie curse. My heart dropped sickeningly into my stomach. Theron looked up at me. His eyes were wide with a triumphant, psychotic glee. "Our life forces are now completely, permanently tethered, my sweet Calliope," Theron gasped, spitting blood onto the pristine snow. "If I bleed, he bleeds. If my heart stops beating, his heart stops beating. You want to kill me to save your precious kingdom. Go ahead. But your beloved Alpha will die right alongside me." Chapter 7. The freezing wind howled through the ruined gates, carrying the metallic stench of fresh blood and necrotic rot. Time seemed to grind to a suffocating halt. The red tether connecting the two men pulsed with a sickening rhythmic hum. Theron was on his knees, clutching the cursed dagger in his chest, laughing like a deranged demon. Across the snowy courtyard, Vane struggled to rise. The northern tyrant coughed, spitting a dark splatter of blood onto the pristine white snow. Theron's blood tie curse was an absolute flawless trap. Vane looked up at me. The brilliant amber light in his eyes was violently flickering, fighting against the creeping exhaustion of the dark magic. He saw my terror. He saw the impossible, soul-crushing weight of the choice I had to make. "Do it, Calliope," Vane rasped. His voice was a fractured, gravelly whisper that barely carried over the moans of the undead. "Do not let him cage you again." Theron sneered, his lips stained crimson. "She won't. She is entirely too weak to sacrifice her beloved northern dog. Submit, Calliope. Surrender your core to me, and I will let him live as my pet." I stood frozen on the elevated stone balcony. The abyssal power of the void hummed beneath my bruised skin. It was starving. It desperately wanted to consume the flesh of the mad king. "Kill him," Vane begged. He dragged himself onto one knee, blood pouring from the dark rune on his chest. His feral lips curled into a soft, utterly devoted smile. "Kill him, and let me go." The choice was an impossible cruelty. Save my world, or save my heart. If I unleashed the abyss upon Theron, Vane's massive heart would violently burst in his chest. If I surrendered to save my mate, we would both become eternal slaves to a madman, and the entire continent would fall to ruin. I closed my eyes. I felt the frantic, panicked rhythm of my own heartbeat. I felt the dark, pulsating core of my magic locked deep within my ribs. It was a dense, suffocating sphere of pure, concentrated death. There is a third choice. I opened my eyes. All fear evaporated, replaced by a glacial, terrifying calm. I stepped off the stone balcony. I did not fall. The shadows in the courtyard rose up to catch me, wrapping around my limbs like a shroud of pitch-black silk. I lowered myself to the snowy earth, landing silently directly between the two men. Theron smiled triumphantly. He misinterpreted my descent. "You submit. Good girl." "I will never submit to you." I did not aim my hands at the Mad King. I did not aim them at the encroaching, groaning army of corpses. Instead, I raised my right hand. I forcefully channeled every single ounce of my necrotic energy into my fingertips until they glowed with a terrifying, absolute darkness. Then I violently plunged my hand directly into my own chest. The shock wave was instantaneous. My fingers bypassed flesh and bone, grasping the metaphysical, pulsating sphere of my death core. I squeezed it with every fraction of my strength. The resulting agony was catastrophic. It felt as if 1,000 frozen blades were tearing simultaneously through my nervous system. I reached out with my left hand and grabbed the ethereal, glowing red tether binding Theron to Vane. I dragged the cursed magic into my own collapsing body, forcing the horrific blood tie to anchor itself strictly to me. Then I crushed my core. A blinding explosion of pitch-black light entirely consumed the courtyard. The deafening sound mirrored the earth fracturing in half. The blood tie curse violently snapped. The red magical tether shattered into a million useless fading sparks. Theron gasped. He stumbled backward into the snow. The arrogant smirk completely vanished from his pale face, instantly replaced by absolute paralyzing terror. He looked down at his chest. The protective tether was entirely gone. He was vulnerable. A bone-chilling, demonic roar shook the very foundations of the obsidian keep. Vane was free. He did not simply shift. He exploded into motion. The northern tyrant lunged across the blood-stained snow with the blinding speed of a lightning strike. Theron barely had time to raise his armored hands before the Alpha was upon him. Vane's lethal claws extended. With one brutal, unhesitating swipe, he tore Theron's head completely from his shoulders. The golden crown hit the ground. The undead army immediately collapsed. Without their master's dark magic animating their bones, the 10,000 corpses turned instantly into lifeless, decaying piles of rot and rusted armor. A profound, haunting silence descended upon the fortress. My knees gave out. I collapsed onto the freezing snow. The agonizing pain was entirely gone. Everything was just numb. The immense, terrifying well of power that had defined my cursed existence was completely empty. I was hollowed out. I was dying. A colossal shadow fell over me. Vane dropped to his knees. He pulled my limp, freezing body into his lap, fiercely cradling my head against his broad chest. He was covered in blood and grime, his chest heaving wildly. Hot tears spilled from his fierce amber eyes, cutting clean tracks through the dirt on his face. "No, no, Calliope, look at me." He firmly cupped my bruised cheek. His large hands were trembling uncontrollably. "Stay with me." I broke the curse, I whispered. My voice was nothing but a fragile, fading breath. "I am just a mortal now. The magic is gone." "I do not care about the magic," Vane roared. His deep voice cracked with sheer, unadulterated desperation. "I care about you." My vision darkened. The edges of the world began to blur into a soft, inviting gray. The cold was seeping deep into my bones. Vane realized he was losing me. The primal, obsessive instinct of the alpha completely took over. He did not ask for permission. He did not hesitate. The desperate mating bond flared violently between us. He tilted my head back, fully exposing the delicate line of my throat. "I will not let the abyss have you," Vane swore against my skin. He sank his sharp fangs deep into my neck. It was the true mate bite. A profound, piercing heat erupted instantly from the wound. Vane was not taking my life. He was forcing his own limitless, feral alpha vitality directly into my collapsing veins. He was sharing his soul. The encroaching darkness violently receded. A sudden, desperate gasp tore through my lungs. My heart, which had been slowing to a terminal halt, suddenly kicked back into a furious, steady rhythm. The intoxicating scent of crushed pine, winter frost, and pure dominance entirely filled my senses. I fluttered my eyes open. Vane pulled back, his lips stained with my blood. The rune on his chest mirrored the fresh bite mark on my neck. He rested his forehead gently against mine. His broad, imposing shoulders shook as he pulled me fiercely against his beating heart, burying his face in my hair. I had lost my godlike power. I was no longer a death-bringer, nor a royal princess of the sunny south. I was something entirely different. I was the absolute, undeniable weakness of the most terrifying monster in the realm. And as I wrapped my arms securely around the imposing warlord, who was sobbing quietly into my shoulder, I knew I had finally found my true kingdom.